Welcome to another episode of the Think Wildlife podcast. Today I speak to Dr. Gaurav Vashishta, who leads the Gharial conservation program in Katarnigat. Listed as critically endangered, this beautiful crocodilian faces several threats in India. This includes habitat loss, freshwater pollution, and unsustainable fishing. Fortunately, there has been significant reintroduction and conservation efforts across India since the 1970s, sparking hopes for a comeback. Tune in to listen about the conservation of this magnificent keystone species. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you're listening to. Also, if you're listening on YouTube or Substack, do consider the optional paid subscription. Not only will 30% of the revenue from this episode go towards the Gharial Conservation Foundation, but also the subscription will help me expand the podcast in the future. So, welcome, Gaurav, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you.
So, what got you interested in conservation and in particular gharials?
So I was born in a village and I spent a significant amount of time of my childhood in the village. And we used to go to local agricultural fields. We had many species that we were interacting on a very like a daily basis. Eventually, when I grew up, I moved out to the city and there was not much to see. And for the first time when went to Kerala for my master's dissertation, then I saw that the natural world has a very different feeling. It's very comforting, but there was a lot of things that were going on there which felt wrong somehow, like being a road there, people throwing plastic and all of that kind of thing. And so I started with a small work on snow leopards in 2015. And at that time, I realized that though through science we can collect data, make policies and everything, conservation is something which is the actual need of the hour. We need to talk to the local community and we need to integrate everyone together. So at that point of time, I felt that I need to go into the field of conservation and not just research and pure science. So I was talking to some colleagues, and then one of my supervisors, they were like, there is this species which is facing very unique. They are facing a lot of threats. Do you think you'll be interested? And I have been very fond of reptiles, especially snakes. I think that they're really, really amazing species. And when I went to Katanyagat for the first time in 2015, I saw my first gharial. And at that point of time, I knew that this is something I would be interested in spending my life saving and conserving and everything. So that's how it all started.
Where are gharials found in India and what is their conservation status?
So gharials presently are critically endangered. They were critically endangered in 2007 also. And in India, there are many populations, but there are only some populations which are actively breeding and they are sustaining themselves. Like there is one population in Girwa River in Katanayakat Wildlife Sanctuary. There is one population in Gandak River in Bihar. Then there is a population in National Chambal Sanctuary in the Chambal River. And the fourth population is in Ramganga River in Corbett Tiger Reserve. All these populations, they are actively nesting. They have a decent size, good structured population, and they will be able to manage themselves even without any human intervention. Then there are smaller populations like in Mahanadi River, Son River, which are constantly needing human interference or intervention, I can say. And there is a lot of human pressure, especially of fishing and killing the animals, sand mining, and all of that. So I would say four actively breeding population and two and three smaller population which need constant human intervention.
So, what is the ecological and cultural significance of gharial?
Ecologically, if we speak about it, they are known to be eating only fish. They are a piscivore species. And their body, they are not, they are the only species of crocodile who like cannot walk on land. all the other species, they can lift their body and they can walk, literally all the species, except for Gharial. So Gharial, in return, received a unique skeletal and morphological thing, and they're very good fish hunters. So their neck can move laterally very fast, so they are able to catch fishes very fast. And they are known to predate on the second trophic level, on the predatory fishes. So when they feed on them, they in turn regulate the smaller fishes, which control the smaller other herbivores and all of that in an ecosystem. So they are kind of a top predator in any aquatic ecosystem, though they stay with other sympatric fish-eating species like otters and dolphins, even mugger. But Gharial, the level at which they feed on fish and regulate the whole thing, they are kind of, I can say they are a kind of a keystone species in their own aquatic ecosystems. They do not live in stagnant waters. They prefer to live in free-flowing waters. But recently, after all the dams that have been made like 50, 60 years back and changes and alteration in free-flowing rivers, gharials are starting to make space for themselves even in river reservoir kind of an ecosystem. If we talk about culture, gharials have been part of the Indian culture for a very long time. You can see them in Mughal paintings. You can see them in Indian mythology. They are known to be the Vahan of Mother Ganga. So Ganga sits on a gharial, and a part of many stories written by many European writers also. And in India and in Nepal, still a lot of societies like smaller tribal groups, they worship crocodiles, especially gharials, as the savior of their resources, their fishes, and their water. So I would say that both ecologically and culturally, they're a very, very unique and important part of the nature.
So why were gharials nearly hunted to extinction?
I would say that it's a human tendency to show that they are superior than everyone. So the reason behind extinction or vanishing of tigers, elephants, and all the other large species like rhinos, the same concept is here. They were hunted for fun. So people would go out, they were fishing, and they were like, "Oh, this is a huge animal. What if we can kill it and hang it in a room and be proud about it?" So first they were hunted for sport. Then there was a hunting for skin and the meat. So local tribals and people were paid money that if you can get us a gharial and you de-skin it and you can sell the skin and the meat. Third, the key issue was the building of dams on the free-flowing rivers. So after independence, we had a very, very eminent need for electricity and food and everything. So a large number of dams were made on the Indian river, especially if you take example of Chambal, you take example of Ghagra River, Ramganga River, Gandak River. All the rivers, there were one, two, or three multiple dams were made. And since gharial, they move along the water, they're very aquatic in nature, they cannot walk on land. So once there was a dam, they were stuck to that isolated patch of river where now the resources were like limited and they had huge competition. The whole ecology of the place changed. So all these things cumulatively led to the reduction, a very, very severe reduction in the number of gharials. And that I can say is the primary reason. I personally believe that more than hunting and all that, it was the building of dams and changing the landscape that kind of, took away their power to move to new space and try to adapt because they cannot walk on the land and so they were stuck. So they had no option to make the best of whatever was left. So that is one thing that I believe led to their severe reduction.
How does fishing pose a threat to the gharial?
So people eat fish, gharial eat fish, people throw nets in the water for the fish, and then the gharial, they also go for the fish. And in this, there are many times that the gharial, they snout because it is very narrow. It gets entangled in the fishing net. If the people there, they are considerate of the animal, what they do, they drag the net out, take out the animal, throw the animal back into the river, and they just go about their business. But when the fishing is happening for more than just basic needs. So there have been instances where people drag net out and they say, okay, the gharial is there and it destroyed the net. What they do, they just cut the snout out and throw the rest of the animal back. And the animal eventually died. So it is a competition for a common resource that kind of, cause fishing to be a primary issue. There are some ways in which this can be solved, like the placement of fishing nets. It can be, you can delimit certain areas where the animals are not going too much and you can fish there. Or there are certain type of nets that you can use, which are not usually, where the animals do not usually entangle. So these are some ways in which that can be done. In India, there are not a lot of monitoring on this because people who are living by the river outside the protected area, they also have a right to collect fish and the water and things for their agriculture and subsistence. So if gharials come there and they get entangled with and the people they do not have too many resources. So they usually, out of frustration for the loss of their net or their fish, they usually just kill the animal and throw it back in the water. So that is the point of issue between the two, the fish itself.
How significant is the issue of habitat loss for gharials, and what is driving this habitat loss?
Yeah. In my personal opinion, I think habitat loss is the only reason the gharial is going to become extinct in India and in Nepal eventually. So, as I mentioned before, gharials move through water, and historically, based on fossil specimens and evidences, gharials were said to be originated in the Shivaliks of the present-day Pakistan, and they were connected all the way to the Southeast Asian nations of Java and Bali. So there were waterways which connected present day Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, all the way up to Southeast Asia. But with time, when we made dams or whenever there was some change in the tectonic shifts, earthquakes, or change in the river ecosystem, these waterways they got disconnected. And that is why the animal got limited to certain isolated patches. And that thing created a kind of an ecosystem which were not favorable for the gharials. I can give you an example of Katanya Ghat where I worked very actively. So there is a river which comes from Nepal and it bifurcates, comes down in India, joins again and becomes the river Ghara. And in 1976, they made a dam there which limited the gharial population to some 20-kilometer area. And recently in 2010, there was a channel shift and the water shifted from the Girua River to Kodiala River. When that happened, a very rapid vegetation succession took place. Now, this vegetation succession is natural. It is not something like coming out of context or equation. But the issue was that the animals had no place to run to. They were stuck to that 20 kilometers. And when that vegetation succession happened, it took over all the sandy spaces, it took over all the shallow waters, and the animals were left with no place to nest. And that to over 50% decline in the nesting efforts in Katanya Ghat itself. And Katanya Ghat is a very, very important population. It was one of the founder population of the Project Crocodile in 1975. So habitat loss or habitat alteration in any form is the primary key reason for threats to gharial. And if we talk about how it is driving the whole ecology and everything, I guess it is the basic need for water by humans. We need water for irrigation, we need water for generation of electricity and all of that. And with time, because of the climate change, the patterns of floods are changing, the water levels are changing. So we are facing a lot of issues in Katanya Ghat. And there are some things that we cannot control. You cannot go back and, just remove a whole dam. Because if we take the concept of sustainability, you have to take care of people also while thinking about the environment and the economy. So I'd say that we are in a kind of a situation where we are stuck and we need to figure out novel methods to protect the species. That is what I can say. in the scenario of habitat loss.
So is sand mining also a driver of habitat loss?
Yes, actually it is. So and the rivers in India, usually they go through an annual cycle of deposition and erosion. So when the river floods, a lot of sediment comes with the river. And when the water levels start reducing and the flow is reduced, the sediment starts depositing. So when a river flows, you are aware that river never flows in a linear straight line. It always going U-turns and like that, changing direction, wherever the path is easier. And what it does is it deposits the sediment on the inside. If you consider, for example, there is a U-shaped meander somewhere. So the river will deposit the sediment on the inner side and it will try to erode on the outer side. That is how the river keep on, changing the landscape every year. And it is a base season. If that at that point of time, it is also the nesting season for the gharials. So if you go and you take that sand, then the gharial will be disturbed for to start with. Second, they will not have enough sand to put their nest into. Third, if they have already put their nest inside and then you take out the whole sand, then the entire nest go away. Now, for a population like Gandak or Ramganga or, for example, Katanyadar, Ghagra, there are very smaller population where the nesting is very limited and not very well documented also. So if you go there and take out the sand, then it is going to either reduce the nesting effort or it is going to just destroy the entire nest. Fortunately, the nesting, this sand mining issue is not that prominent inside the protected areas, except for the Chambal Sanctuary. Chambal Sanctuary is actually at the junction of three states, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan. So whenever the water dries up, it provides access for a interstate boundary crossing very easily. And at that point of time, there is a lot of sand mining that happens. It is well documented actually. And that actually kind of make a huge impact on the nesting behavior of the species. So I would say, yes, sand mining is a very critical habitat loss driver. Yes.
In some of your research, you found that sand addition promotes gharial nesting. Why is this the case? And elaborate upon your research.
So we were facing the issue of a lack of nesting space for gharials in Irwa. And first what we did, we tried to remove some of the vegetation and provide access to the animals. But we found that the animals were still facing other threats. Like, for example, a mother came, nest in whatever sand was available, but because there was still some roots or feed bank left, by the time the babies would grow in the eggs, the vegetation roots would cause harm to the eggshell and the nest suffered a huge hatching loss actually. So we thought what can be done, what could be the alternative. So we had a discussion with the people in IUCN Crocodile Specialist Group, the Gharial Ecology Project working in Chambal River, people working in different parts of the world. And we found that there were some incidents where people simply try to create artificial nesting space. So we said, okay, let us try that. And what we did, we collected a lot of river sand from the river itself near the nesting site. We bought it and we piled it up on the location that we selected. And we just gave it a slope. We just tried to recreate a river bank where a gharial would go and try to nest. And fortunately, the gharials, they loved it. Even the mothers and pythons and turtles, everyone loved it. The moment we did it in Jan of 2020. So once we laid all the sand, within 2-3 days, all the animals started to come and started basking on these places. And they found them to be very good sandy sites. And we had like double the number of nests compared to 2019. We had very high hatching success. So we went from 63% to 93% within a year. And the loss of eggs or hatchlings due to vegetation or anything else, everything vanished. So it was a very, very nice move. It didn't require much money. It didn't require a lot of human intervention. You just need to bring a lot of sand, pile it up, make a slope towards the water, and that is all. So we are still doing it in Katanyaga from the last 4 years, and it is giving same kind of results to us.
So talk a bit about the Gharial conservation program at Katarinagat and some of the initiatives you guys are running.
So we started working there in 2015. I did my master's there. We did at least 5 or 6 projects there. And we had a lot of interns who came and started helping us with this. And then we realized that we need to give it some kind of a formal form based on which we can, write more grants and projects and have a better formal collaboration with other stakeholders. So that is why in 2023-24, we made Gharial Conservation Foundation. The purpose behind doing this was that I look at conservation as a collaborative and as an integrated thing where many stakeholders come together and try to work towards the conservation of the species or the landscape rather than a group coming, collecting data, going back, publishing paper, and forgetting about the space. So we have been very fortunate. We had some really, really amazing people in the forest department in Katanyagat Wildlife Division who took interest and showed initiative and, supported us in the last 10 years. We had people from the local community who actively came and tried to help us, locate nests and do monitoring, help us with logistics. And recently we had started working in Ghagara River also. So Ghagara is an unprotected stretch of river. It is outside any protected area. And we found that there were gharials there also. So we thought and we realized that we need to look at the whole landscape rather than just one part of the landscape. And we, as part of our new initiative, in 2003, we started working both in the Girwa protected area and the unprotected Ghagara River. So now we do all of our monitoring together in the entire ecosystem. And we have started investing more resources and networking with the forest department and the local community so that we can, minimize our resource consumption and have better information network. So we sit here and we give a call to a person in a village on Ghagara or Girwa, and we were like, what is the situation like? And they're like, I went there on this day. We found these many animals sitting there. We have taught them to identify a male or a female gharial between a mother and a gharial. What is a adult? What is a hatchling? And all of that. What is a trial nest? And they collect all of this information and they keep on passing this to us. So this way we have started making up a small network, and this is the initiative we are trying to make, that we can have an information system where we can collect data and provide it to the department. Department can make policies and regulation, whatever is necessary. And we see everyone equal and we try that everyone come and try to work together. So that is what we are trying to initiate in Katanyaga right now.
So talk about your film, The Gharial Gharial.
The film actually, the idea came from one of the forest department official. They were like, we all are doing wonderful work here. You guys have been here for a very, very long time. And and research papers are a bit complex and too much scientific, too much technical for, local people to understand or even for general person to understand. If I go and I be like, thermoregulation and thermosensitive period, this, that, and all that. So people will be like, hey, what are you saying? So for them to understand, you need to bring down everything to their level in their language, in their terms. And then at that point of time, took an initiative to make a small movie. It was for an educational purpose. So we made that movie. It is like for 10, 11 minutes. And we employed 2 local kids from the nearby village, Bardia village. So there is this guy and there's this girl. So this guy, he is from the city, like in the story, he's from the city and he is coming and visiting his cousins. And then he meets this girl, one of his cousins. And then he's like, hey, you have all this wonderful biodiversity, and we don't have anything in the city. You're so fortunate. And then the girl, in the process of conversing, tells him all about the biodiversity and the Gharial and the river and the dams and everything. If you watch that movie, it has subtitles also. Within 10 minutes, you'll get the gist of what we did in 10 years. It it is in Hindi in the local dialect, but with English subtitles. And it is used as educational movie for training for the forest department, for researchers, for interns and everyone. And our aim was to highlight the role of local community and the forest department in protection of a species which is facing an imminent threat to their survival. So that was the idea behind this movie.
So around India and Nepal, there's quite a few Gharial reintroduction projects taking place. So talk about some of these projects and what are some of the key challenges to Gharial reintroduction and how successful have these projects been?
Okay, so Gharial reintroduction and restocking programs, they all were part of the Project Crocodile, which began in 1975. So they would take some eggs from the wild, take it to incubation centers like Ukraine or MCBT and Deuri in Morena. The babies would hatch out after some time, and then they will, nourish them for when they are 1 or 2 years of age, and then they put it back either in the source population or into new areas to reproduce or restock the population. So at that point of time, when there were no gharials, almost no gharials, that point of time, this reintroduction scheme, it worked very well. It helped us regain the number of animals. We are at around 2000 plus animals in total right now. We have around 650, 700 adult breeding animals. We have almost 500 nests all over India and Nepal. And it worked very well. But at the present point of time, we have a lot of animals in the wild and in the captivity. But the thing that we do not have is a optimal habitat. So our next thing that we need to focus in is in creating protected and potential habitat for the animals. Then what will they do? They bring the animals, they release them in the wild, and then they forget about it. But what we need to do is that we need to understand that yes, we have regained the initial success of raising the number of animals. We have a good count now. Now we need to look past that and we need to look into screening these animals for disease, screening these animals for their genetic makeup, screening these animals for their sex, if they are males or females. I guess they do it in some part of India, looking for which sex it is. And the most important thing is that when you release the animals, please make sure that you go back and try to check on what happened to these animals. So currently, in practice, they just leave the animal, they do some tagging, cattle tagging or other kind of tagging, skewed cutting, but they do not follow up what happened to these animals eventually. So it is more like dumping the animals in the river and then forgetting about it. So my suggestion would be that the program should, try to update itself. And when you are doing the reintroduction, make sure that you do genetic screening, you do the sex screening if they are males or female, what is the ratio. And most importantly, you need to go back and look into what happened to those animals. Because otherwise it is just waste of money. That's all. That's what I think about the reintroduction program.
So what have been some of the key challenges you have faced at the Gharial conservation program, and how can individuals contribute to this project?
So the first key challenge is that Gharial is still not one of those species for which anyone try to show a very, very keen interest. All right, it is not a very charismatic species. It is not favorite with tourism. So it has not much contribution to revenue generation. And it is a species which just go out and it lie there fast. So there is nothing fancy about gharials or muggers for that matter. They do not make any sound. They don't do anything. They are just lying there. For a tiger or for an elephant, rhino, leopard, or even for a snake, you can see them moving. You can see them climbing up the tree, roaring, making sounds, and showing some emotion or behavior. But for gharials, there is nothing to contribute towards tourism or revenue generation or anything. So to get money for that species or to bring attention for that species from the department, from government agencies, or from other, even from CSR or others, it is very, very hard to generate money. So all the money that we have received, they came from agencies who looked past the charisma and all that about the species and looked at the evolutionary or ecological importance of those species. And that is why we received those money. And all that money was not very large amount of money. They were just for 1 year or 1.5 year. So one of the key challenges receiving or keep getting money regularly so that we can keep maintaining the work that we are doing. So now we finish a project, and in that process we write the next project. We wait for the money to come, and then when the money comes, then we restart, and that kind of creates a gap in the database that we are trying to create. So we have like a 10-year data from Kataniakat right now. There are some minor gaps in between. We could have had done better if we had regular flow of money that had kept coming. Second is because that funding and everything is limited, we are very much dependent on the department and local community for their support in logistics, for boat, stay and everything. And if we could, when we tried working with some CSRs, and no one wants to invest good amount of money where we can have our own boat or our own equipments and everything. So we are a lot much dependent on other people, and that kind of becomes a liability for us for some time. So if we are going in there and the boat is needed for something else, maybe a rescue operation or something, then we cannot go to work on that day. If the boat, the engine is not working, we are stuck there, we cannot go to work on that day. If we are going to the forest department, they have two researcher room, and some other agency or some other conservation NGO, they have already booked the room and they're staying there. So we have to wait or delay our work till it is free, or we can, get another accommodation somewhere. So these are some of the things that we very, very, regularly, frequently kind of experience. Then there is one thing is that in the departments themselves, there are not too many of research vacancies. There are vacancies like project biologists, and it is mostly focused on monitoring the mammal, the megafauna like elephants or tigers or leopards and rhino. So there is not too much focus on freshwater ecosystems or gharials or muggers and everything like that. If you go to them, they're like, yeah, there are so many muggers lying there. There's so many gharials there. What to do about them? They can take care of themselves. So I believe that if the department can include some kind of a research vacancy or create some kind of a project, a long-term project to have a regular monitoring, that could, kind of reduce the challenge we face very frequently. So these are some of the things that I have encountered in our program.
And how can individuals contribute to the program?
So there are many ways. The general thinking is that people feel that you can only contribute when you go to the field, and you have to be on a boat and you have to count the animals and do all that being in the wild thing and catching the animals. That is the only kind of contribution. I believe that the conservation works on many fronts at the same time. So an individual can work with us in helping us sorting out data, analyzing it, and writing a paper about it. An individual can work in helping us raise money or raise awareness. We had opportunity to work with many people where they help us create good visual aid and posters and creative arts, which we use for our training programs. So a person can come and work with us in the field itself. But if you are not very well, into going to field and staying in harsh conditions, then they can help us with data processing, looking into GIS and remote sensing. They can help us create nice painting artwork, which they can help us either they will, put out on auction, generate money for the conservation, or they can create online platform. Like what you are doing, it is something that you're contributing for the conservation of Gharial. So when this thing goes online, people will listen to this. They'll know what we are going through or what kind of work we do. And maybe someone will come up and they'll be like, okay, we wanted to help someone, but we didn't know what to do. Now we heard about you, and okay, we can do something for you. So this is also a kind of contribution that a individual can do, being in any part of the world. So that's what I think.
So that was the final question I had for you today. Thank you so much for taking time out for this.
Yeah, sure.
So we have reached the end of this episode of the Think Wildlife podcast. If you are still listening, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast and learned something new about conservation. Feel free to leave your thoughts on the episode and don't forget to share and subscribe. Before we end the podcast, I would like to share another podcast on Indian wildlife called Think About Wildlife by Ishika Ramakrishna. Also, for those who would like to learn more about conservation in India, I have attached a link to 3 books on Indian wildlife, which I highly recommend. One is a field guide to the mammals of India by Vivek Menon, which is by far one of the most detailed field guides I have seen from anywhere in the world. The second is titled At the Feet of Living Things, written by the various conservationists at the Nature Conservation Foundation. It covers 25 years of the organization's research, ranging from conservation of snow leopards in Spiti Valley to rainforest restoration in Annamalai and dugong conservation in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The final is a 4-part series by Mr. H.S. Pabla, a former Indian Forest Service officer, which provides a very in-depth analysis of the state of India's conservation and the way forward. It covers species reintroduction, wildlife tourism, the forest rights, and poaching. He also talks about his time as an officer heading various conservation projects in Madhya Pradesh, ranging from the reintroduction of Barasinga and blackbuck to the gore and tackling the Panna poaching crisis. And with that, we end this episode of Think Wildlife Podcast. Thank you once again.